Welcome to episode 68 of the Travel Calumet Original Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Sense, and today I am joined by Dan Ariens, Chairman and CEO of AriensCo, whose home base is here in Calumet County in Brillion. Recently, AriensCo published The Nature of Business, its corporate conservation report, and the report is a beautiful and interesting review of the efforts underway at AriensCo to reclaim local native biodiversity. Welcome to the Travel Calumet Original Podcast, Dan, and congratulations to you and all the team at AriensCo on your efforts to date at protecting nature and biodiversity through corporate conservation.
Thank you, Rick.
Could you walk listeners through the origin story of the efforts at AriensCo and that you've undertaken here to date? Why this focus? Why this strategy?
Well, it's interesting, as I've been known to do, our property between the Highway 10 plants, our headquarters, which we call Plant 1, and the one up near Brillion High School, Plant 3, there's quite a large property between us. And we had decided years ago not to develop that property. But as time passes and we do projects and things, I noticed that we were not really mindful of how that area was being kept. I found us dumping, concrete block or projects that had, I'm not saying waste or anything that was contaminant, but just the wrong kinds of things were being dumped in areas around the property because it was there and it wasn't being cared for. So on a tour, I spotted these things and talked to our team and said, "What are we doing here?" And that was sort of the genesis of saying, "All right, let's put a project together to care for this property so it's not abused in any way." And that turned into this biodiversity project where we built what we call our Mike Ariens trails. And from the trails, we planted prairie and wildflowers and brought in the pollinators. That turned into honey. And we have our own honey production. And now it built into this building what we call an oak savanna when we started to do the history of this property back to the early 1800s.
So what's the core of AriensCo's conservation effort?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The core is just, we have no intention, at least, I wouldn't say forever because nothing is forever, but we, at least in my tenure, we don't see us developing that property. And when we look at what's happening there, how do we preserve it in a way that we take care of the woods? So there's a wetlands in there that's not really technically wetlands, but there's a lot of water that sits idle, but a lot of ash tree in there. So sort of the care for the trees, and that's what turned us to oak savanna when we studied what was native there. The oak savanna is really an interesting canopy of oak trees that are naturally growing, some 100 to 200 yards apart from each other, but they broadcast great big foliage. So that's kind of what we're intending to redevelop there.
Will you share with listeners the specific projects then that are taking place in addition to the oak savanna?
We've put the project on hold, but it's not dead. It's just on hold for now as we went through a turn down in our business. But we have a research project going on to look for native species, do some counts. We had a local biologist that worked as one of our employees on salary. She was in the field pretty much daily, discovering, kind of doing a population or a diversity of wildlife from insects, bumblebees, the caterpillars, butterflies, all the way up to four-legged mammals, counting our deer population in there. And, we're attached from Center Road, which runs parallel to Highway 10. To the south of Center Road is all great big marsh. It's the Brillion Marsh. So the wildlife runs in and out of our property back to the marsh, or flies, frankly. So, and speaking of that, the avian species, we've migrated or recruited wood ducks, and because we scraped a small, what would I call it, a wetlands that we actually formed. So drainage is managed around the area. So that attracted wood ducks and some other things. So it's, the project itself is called the Oak Savanna, and that's what we certified with the Wildlife Habitat Council.
You mentioned employees, and there's some involvement there. Could you maybe walk through for listeners who's actually involved in the work that's being done on the project?
Without dropping names, it's They're all volunteers at this point, and we have the bee people that help with the hives. So now the hives are put away for winter, but it takes some people to manage that. The harvesting of honey, we have the same people harvest honey, so they manage the hives. And hives are tricky, in winters in Wisconsin, with the wrong kind of weather, we lose these hives. So we've got to rebuild them and replenish them in the spring. And it's kind of a hit and miss. We don't know what we're going to get when we open them up in the spring. But again, harvesting honey, expanding the hives, because sometimes these things populate and grow from 4 hives to 6 to 8 to 12, and we kind of go up and down at that level. And so that's the honey. Then there's people that are maintaining the prairie. So they're basically outdoors. They're kind of a part of our landscape crew, burning, mowing. We also bring in Fox Valley Technical College and their students who are getting degrees in wildlife habitat and conservation. They help us with the burn, and it's part of their curriculum, so they're getting some credit for that work as a project. And then we have the birders. We have people that are really focused on birds, and one of those is the wood ducks. Wood ducks. The other is the bluebirds, which is a population that needs some care. So we put up a lot of bluebird houses, and we've got a couple other bird houses that we put around the wood ducks, kestrel, which is a bird of prey, the bluebirds, which we have to protect because sparrows go in there and take them out. It's kind of tough to be a bluebird these days.
Okay.
It's a tough living. And there's another bird that I'm trying to think of the species, but we put some other birdhouses up for them as well. Purple martin, that's what it is. Purple martins helps with the insects. So
it's a pretty diverse population, and give listeners a little background on the hives and some more of that honey production, and maybe talk about populations that you may or may not have run into there as you were developing that.
yeah, it's been interesting. The whole insect world is it's it's above my pay grade because I'm learning as I listen to our team do this work. But so the honeys, the bee thing started with just sort of an innocent, we've got wildflowers, we've got to pollinate them. Let's start with bees. And of course that turned into honey, and I didn't know what it would mean if I asked some people to harvest that honey, and people were very willing to volunteer and help. And then we sell that honey and it goes back into the conservation programs. But in the sort of process of watching bees fly around this area, we found what turns out to be an endangered species, honeybee. Or it's not a honeybee, it's a bumblebee. It's called the rusty patch bumblebee. And it had not been seen in Calumet County for 50 years. So we talked to the Wisconsin State DNR and we asked them about the rusty patch. They confirmed that we had discovered a hive, which is a ground bee, and we got some great photos of it. And they're in that brochure that you mentioned at the top of the show. And it's now been interesting. So they've been studying the rusty patch. We haven't seen it since, but we did confirm that it's not extinct and it's not missing. It's just they're hard to find.
What kind of benefits would you say Ariens companies realized from doing this project?
I've always been really big on having our vision statement is passionate people, astounded customers. And to me, when we have a group of engaged and active and energized team members as part of the Ariens family business, we all win. And some of these projects, frankly, are ways for us to engage people with things outside of, production or management of the business or the marketing, sales, engineering, and design. These are like in some ways creating hobbies for people beyond work. So I think really the benefits are they're culturally helpful to what the Ariens company business culture is all about.
How has that conservation effort interacted with some of the other projects here, like the Ariens Nordic Center, Stone Prairie, and such?
Yeah, that's a great question. It kind of, one feeds into the other, and the conservation project started first. I would take that back to somewhere around 2012 or 13. My dad was still with us, and we talked about this trail. We named it the Mike Ariens Trail because my father was a runner. He loved to run, and for him, running from his house out near the Nordic Center back into Brillion and then back home was his morning jog. My dad was a man. He running for him was like a morning ritual, and if he missed it, he didn't feel good. But sometimes he's running on Round Lake Road out there by himself and it's dark. And that was always a concern. So the trails are a way to get away from the traffic and have a good, safe run. So yeah, we built the trails in, I think it was around 2012. And from there, it fed into, hey, what else are we gonna do with the property? All the things I described already. And then you go out to the Nordic Center. Dad passed away in 2015, and that property around my mother and his house was basically it was rented and leased to some farms. And I looked at it and thought, well, we're now sponsors of the Nordic Biathlon US team. That's some 300 and some acres. And then we added on Grass Lake out there, which is another 90 acres. And Grass Lake is a preserve, right? It's a flyover, incredible amounts of wildlife and avian out there. So it just everything's feeding upon itself. The other is, Round Lake Farms, which is at the Nordic Center, but that barn overlooks Round Lake, and I think part of what we're doing there is keeping that lake clean, trying to continue to maintain cleaner water out there. See if we can't build a fish population. That's a project that has a longer term sort of vision for it because we're surrounded by good farmers and they need to make a living too. So we're not trying to stop anything, but we're just trying to balance everything out if we can. So,
Did it play a role in Stone Prairie, the development of that property too?
well, yeah, Stone Prairie's part of the story I started with. That's in the area right around the Mike Ariens Trail. The trails were up. I was looking for expanding trails. I stumbled upon the original farmhouse of the Schneider family that we researched goes back to the 1840s. We found the foundation. The stories were that my great uncle Francis took the barn down because it just wasn't safe. So the foundation was there, but that's where we were throwing a lot of junk inside the old barn foundation. Concrete block, stone walls that we took out, concrete spancrete walls we took out. We Instead of taking to a landfill, we put them out there. And I thought, well, I had just been to a really interesting site with a lot of history in Cappadocia, Turkey, and they were doing an archaeological dig, and I saw what they did with these foundations. So I thought, well, we could use the stone foundations of the old barn, support them, tip them up, and we put the pavilion over the top of these foundations. And I think kind of the fun part about that for me anyway was in the design. We heated the floor, so you're outdoors. You've got a heated floor, but we can light the fire. We have electric heat lamps above. We have events out there now, and it's cold. Yeah, I'm sitting here on November 10th, 2025, and we're 20 degrees outside today, and we'll have an event outside in Stone Prairie. So we have, I think Rick, we have the farm or the barn and then the farmhouse. We found that foundation while we were cleaning out the barn. The farmhouse foundation was completely buried, and we kind of excavated and hid it. So cleaned that up and did the same thing and then put bathrooms out there. But the Ariens Hospitality Group this year, between Stone Prairie and Round Lake Farms, will do close to 90 weddings in calendar 25. So we're bringing a lot of people into Brillion, and that was part of our goal too.
The unique thing about Stone Prairie is, besides the bathrooms, which obviously are enclosed, the only other enclosed structure that's out there is the greenhouse.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe if you would share with listeners the insight of why the greenhouse.
Well, the honest truth is that my wife and I were at the Chelsea Garden Show in Chelsea, which is in London. And it's a beautiful garden show, and that's kind of our industry, right? So we had not been, but I wanted to see what the garden show was about. And there's a little bit of power equipment there, but mostly it's the British and their gardens are very well known to be very meticulous. And there they were selling these beautiful steel and aluminum greenhouses. And my wife saw one and said, "Boy, I'd love to have something like that in our backyard." And of course, we weren't going to be able to do that. We don't have the space. But then I thought, well, it would look pretty cool at Stone Prairie. And so as we were actually as we were working on Stone Prairie, the idea of the greenhouse came along. When I say working on, we were working on the designs, and there's a lot of landscape in the design of the whole space. So we kind of centered things off of the greenhouse based on where the farmhouse and the barn were located. But that's a British-made Victorian greenhouse that then to spice it up, we put crystal chandeliers in the middle of it so you can get a nice photo. Not too many greenhouses with crystal chandeliers.
I was just going to ask about the chandeliers, so thanks for filling me in before I even had to
Yeah.
ask. It's interesting because you obviously understand the importance of tourism to a community. The idea of our current tagline here in Calumet County for tourism is "Come for a visit, stay for a lifetime." With the idea being we need to draw more people that want to be working here and having a family here and living here and hopefully adding more kids to the mix to have even more employees and workers and people contributing to our community as we go forward. With that being said, why do you think tourism is so impacted by something like Stone Prairie, Round Lake Farm, Ariens Nordic Center, and the efforts that you're doing overall with conservation?
I think it's a complete package, if you will, of things to do, places to see. I want them all to be very unique destinations. I want them to be, I want us to be able to tell a story about how interesting and unique and special these areas are, all the venues. And then I want people to say, well, one of these days I want to go there and see it. And I would include the Ariens Museum in that as well. I just entertained, we had a group from Europe 2 weeks ago. All of our European distributors were here from Central Europe, not all of them, but from Central Europe. And it tells our brand story, but when they ask what's the museum's purpose, my message is always I want to tell the story of Brillion, Wisconsin and the Ariens family, because we've been in Brillion since the very late 1800s, 1893. And we've been part of building this community. So now fast forward to 2025 and we still want to be part of building this community. And I love the tagline, bring people to Brillion or Calumet County and figure out ways to help them stay, right? And that's our whole purpose is all, and selfishly, very clearly selfishly, if we want to keep growing our business, I need to recruit really good people that want to work at Ariens Company in Brillion, Wisconsin. So
If people want to learn more, Dan, where would you direct them? Where would you tell them to go to find more information?
yeah, the ariensco.com website, ariensco.com. That's our corporate website. So hospitality is part of that. I mean, you can always get there through our branded links, gravely.com or ariens.com, which takes you to the product pages. But inside there, you'll see corporate, and then corporate is hospitality. So, and we tell our story there. We're building part of the story of the nature of business, the brochure that we published not too long ago. We'll put that out on the corporate website in the next year. So that'll be out there soon.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Dan, for joining me on episode 68 of the Travel Calumet Original Podcast. And much success to you and everyone at AriensCo as you continue down this sustainability path. And listeners, thank you for tuning in episode 68 of the Travel Calumet Original Podcast. Please make sure you check out the other 67 episodes. And you can do that by scrolling down the homepage and clicking on the microphone at travelcalumet.com. Or you can find us on your favorite podcatcher or podcast app. And if you like what you heard today or previous episodes, please share with and invite your friends to listen to the Travel Calumet Original Podcast. Help us share the news of all the great things to see and do here in Calumet County, like natural beauty and landscape being nurtured by our friends at AriensCo. Thank you for listening, and until next time.